welcome to Biztech's Technology Show. Our conversation today looks at how the tech sector will evolve in 2023, including 4 key trends which will shape and impact the industry. Now, to give us insights on this topic, our guest today is coming out of Australia. He's Anthony Spiteri. He's the regional CTO, Asia Pacific and Japan, and lead cloud and service provider technologist at Veeam Software. Now, Veeam provides organizations with resiliency through data security, data recovery, and data freedom for their hybrid cloud. Now, they're headquartered in the UK, in the US, in Ohio, with offices in more than 30 countries. Now, they protect over 450,000 customers worldwide, including 82% of the Fortune 500 and 72% of the Global 2000. Now, with that impressive stats, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be on.
Now, Anthony, for a start, could you just give us an overview of Veeam Software and its history?
Yeah, so Veeam is a company that's now in its, I think, 18th year, actually. So, we started back in 2006 and basically rode the wave of virtualization. So when you think about what was happening in that sort of mid-2000s into 2010, VMware was becoming the dominant technology in the data center. Organizations were moving to virtualization, and they really needed a way to be able to back up those workloads that were shifting from the physical to the virtual. So, we did very well in riding that virtualization wave, becoming, the number one data protection company in that space. But as we've grown and evolved, we started very small. I joined Veeam 6.5 years ago. We had 2 products, the main Veeam backup and replication product, and then a series of monitoring tools. Since then, we've now got this portfolio of modular applications and programs that cover not just virtualization, but cover software as a service, Kubernetes, public cloud, physical and virtual. So, we've tried to really, start strong in that virtualization space. But as you build customers, you mentioned 450,000, right? We've got a very, very strong customer base. We then need to look at what else can we protect, because our customers then are asking us when their workloads are shifting from virtualization to the cloud, as an example, how we protect it. So today, we're an ecosystem player. We are software-driven, hardware agnostic, which means that our customers have freedom of choice with their hardware, which is very important, and means that we can be very flexible in the way that we develop our software. So we're in a really interesting place, and it's a really good, exciting, fun, innovative company to work for.
Okay, so put some context into your products and services. Who do you help? Give us some idea of customers that you work with and how you help them and how they benefit from your products and services.
Yeah, actually, so in terms of, a lot of people would ask about the verticals that we play in, and it's really across the board. Given the fact we have that huge number, right? You're obviously going to touch a lot of different verticals. So we see success globally in a lot of financial institutions, obviously academia, but then in APJ we have a good number of banks. KBank as an example. We've got a number of different banks within Thailand as well. That's where KBank is obviously based. So the amount of differentiation in our customer base is strong. And I also should mention the fact that we are very strong in our service provider play. So we run a really strong cloud and reseller business, which is our go-to-market effectively. But we've got a strong network of service providers, which obviously give us a distribution point to be able to touch a lot more customers without us having to be that direct line of sight.
And so how big is the APJ business relative to the overall business globally?
Yeah, obviously in APJ, we have about, we've got 500 employees. Like if we put it into the perspective of our employee growth. So globally, we have 5,000 employees. Within region in APJ, we have about 500. So 10%. And that actually mirrors quite well with our global revenue, if you look at that, which is topping, I believe, about 1.4 to 1.5 billion in revenue, right? So if you work out the numbers, that's kind of where it is. APJ is still very much the growing region for us. We are number one in EMEA. We're rising up the ranks quickly in North America. And in APJ, we're actually very close. In ANZ specifically, we're the #1 provider of backup and data protection. And we're moving up quickly within those ranks in APJ as a whole. The SEEK, we've got great success in Japan happening. That's always a bit of a slow burning sort of country to gain success in, but we're starting to see the fruits of that for about the last 3 to 4 years of hard work with the team there. But then success within Singapore. India is another market where we're looking to grow quite strongly. And then the other ones, Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, Indonesia. Very, very strong and successful, but we've got a long way to go, and growth is looking great for the next couple of years.
Okay, if I'm a CIO in those markets, why would I pick you compared to your competitors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the market in backup is probably the most competitive market out there. There's no one single monopoly, even though we would like to get that way. We have got a target for ourselves globally to get to 20-25% market share, which is basically double where we're at today. But going back to the question, I think it really comes down to the core values of Veeam, which is, reliability, flexibility. That's very important to us. So we always believe in releasing a product that is reliable, that is not buggy, and that's reflective in our release cycle as well, and how we do actually release our main core product, Veeam Backup and Replication. But then it's also just about usability, being simple to use. That's very important. So getting rid of the complexity and just doing what the sticker says effectively, right? Does it back up? Tick. Does it recover? Yes. And I think if you break it down to that, obviously by way of the numbers that we've had globally with our customer base and our success and our growth, I think we're doing that right. So that would be my first, sort of play to them. But then secondly, it's just the innovation that we've been able to drive out of that. When we talk about simplicity, the best way to be simplistic is to basically drive innovation and make that complexity easy. So when it comes to backup, when it comes to how you store it, when it comes to how you recover it, we've got great technology around that. One great example of that actually is instant VM recovery. That's actually something that we brought to market first, very early on. And we've got that patented as a technology, right? And everyone's obviously in the market has basically risen to that and copied that particular feature. But we still have it purely based on software, which means if you have a workload that you've backed up, you can recover it to a platform within seconds. That's amazing, right? And that's still fundamentally what works amazingly for us.
Now, Anthony, I want to shift to you and your recent commentary on 4 key trends to watch out for in 2023. Could you walk us through these key trends, starting with cybersecurity, which obviously is top of mind now, not only among CIOs, but really among senior management across the world?
Everywhere, right? Like it's such a hot topic. Cybersecurity, ransomware. The one thing that I've been saying over the past 3 years since the pandemic is that what we've seen is an acceleration of the sophistication of these attacks. Okay. So where else, I actually was speaking yesterday to someone who was talking about the ransomware back in the 90s. Okay. And they actually, instead of a Bitcoin ransom, they got a Western Union check request as an example, right? So we evolve quite quickly, in terms of, how these things go. But I guess the main point there is that today the attack surface has grown. And what I do believe is that if we use the recent examples in ANZ of Optus and Medibank, the types of targets are definitely becoming more and more calculated in terms of the impact that they can create. Okay. So what I mean by that is if you can target a company like in Australia, Optus is the number 2 or 3 telco provider, Medibank is a health provider. If you can create fear and, claim that you hold the data, you've breached these systems, then you're creating fear amongst the population and understanding that no one is safe. Absolutely. So I think that, and that then serves these groups which have turned, the ransomware groups, which not only work individually now, but work through ransomware as a service. There's some great examples of that. But what I think that also means is that even though we're all more hyper aware of these attacks, we will still be looking, I think, at the high level for the complex attacks. And then more and more people like the elderly, your normal sort of IT department who are not that tech savvy, they're the ones that are going to get attacked and impacted and manipulated. So I think it's working at two levels, that high impact level, but also then if you think of a pyramid, there is obviously those low hanging fruit attacks, which are still happening.
And also one of the key things that's also evolved, and you look at it, cyber attacks, according to Checkpoint Software, increased 38% in 2022. And part of the reason for that is also the fact that organized crime is actually involved in it. It's
yes,
state-sponsored or organized crime. And these are also then magnifying the problem multiple fold.
Yeah. I think, yeah, if you look at that and add that to the percentage of, I think another percentage, which we had a 2023 data protection trends report, which we released recently. 82% of organizations in APJ experienced at least one cyber attack in 2022. So that matches the number that you mentioned, which I think was 38%. Mm-hmm. And then they obviously expect to be targeted again in 2023. So yeah, it's a really precarious position that we're in, but I think that's where us as technologists and us as thought leaders need to go and, say to CIOs, CTOs, and IT departments specifically to be ready and aware. And it's not just thinking about, that actual, how do you then recover from it? How have we backed up our software? It's an end-to-end approach. So we need education. We need the part in the middle, which is where Veeam comes into play with great technology that's able to back up and then recover. And then at the end, you need a process to be able to react to an event. Okay, so you need to have the steps to go through from the CIO, the CISO, the IT department. What happens when an event occurs? We have to then, let all of our organization know. There has to be a process and a plan in place. So for me, Veeam's just part of the overall picture and how companies need to be ready for these attacks.
Now, the second trend that you highlighted is really the fact that the tech industry as a whole, which has had a bumper 2020, 2021, 2022, is really heading for a slowdown in growth. And you can see this by all the layoffs and consolidations that are happening in the industry. Walk us through what your thoughts are, and this leads to the third trend you talked about, also consolidation. And I suppose that's also mirroring what's going to happen. Share with us those two key trends that you identified.
Yeah, I think obviously what we're seeing, I saw a great infographic of the number of layoffs in tech over the past 12 months, and it's staggering. I think we might have hit close to 200,000. I think it was 140, 200,000. Like those numbers are insane when you think about it. But I think it does, if we go back to what I was talking about, the pandemic accelerated a lot of e-commerce, online business, working from home, but if you look at that was always going to be a bubble that had to burst, because there was a lot of falseness created in that economy and in the situation we're in. So I think what happened with the tech is that they went out and hired big tech specifically. I think this, obviously if I don't want to name the names, but I think we know the big tech. They went out and hired crazy. They went out and thought that this growth, and I don't understand how they thought the growth was going to continue, because there's much smarter guys than me working in those industries, right? And a lot of us saw it. So, but I think there was just this sense of inevitability that the good times would continue. And if we went through the last decade after the GFC with tremendous growth, valuations went up, the amount of money in VE and private equity firms, was almost criminal in a way, if you think about it. So this is all part of a reset, right? And I think it's a natural reset to basically set us up for what comes in the next 10 years. I think the point, though, that I'd like to make is that even though we're seeing these layoffs, the technology advancement, the amount of innovation doesn't stop. Do you know what I mean? So that's the important part. So CEOs, CTOs that we're talking to here can't relax and can't think that, okay, technology as a whole is taking a break. That means I can take a break. You can't do that, because technology and innovation will continue to gather steam. And in fact, what I feel these guys are doing, they're clearing the decks. And Microsoft is a good example. They laid off 10,000 staff, but the next day they announced a $10 billion investment in ChatGPT.
Yes.
That's what's happening. So it's a very interesting time that we're in.
And I'm going to come back to you about
Yes.
GPT, because that's an important key trend that we need to talk about. But really, while we're in the topic of layoffs, the third trend you identified is also an IT skills shortage. So perhaps one of the, and obviously the thesis around this is, yes, they've overhired, but then again, we've had a white hot talent market of skill shortage, and this is not an Asian thing, this is a global thing.
Global, absolutely.
And perhaps I'd like to hear your thoughts around what you mentioned, the IT skills shortage, and how perhaps all these layoffs actually aren't so bad after all.
Yeah, so the IT skills shortage is interesting because I think it's happening at different speeds, at different levels. So I think what we've seen is a number one, technology is moving ahead, right? So if we think about, we talked about, Veeam riding that virtualization wave. That virtualization wave has become mainstream. So that's not a wave anymore. The next wave that's coming through that we've seen over the past few years has been containerization, Kubernetes, modern data platforms, right, which have changed the fundamentals of what it is to host an application. So that in turn means that the people that were proficient in virtualization need to all of a sudden become proficient in these new technologies. But it's moved that quickly that we've left a massive gap in that particular space. And then what's also happened is that the people that are working on these platforms the personas have changed a little bit. We haven't just got platform engineers, infrastructure people. We've now got developers, DevOps, SREs, different types of teams. And what that's doing is that in itself, I feel, is creating a bit of a gap, because infrastructure people used to handle certain aspects of the platform, but now DevOps are kind of doing both jobs. So are there enough DevOps in the world? Potentially not. Are the infrastructure people skilling up quickly to understand how those DevOps people work? Probably not. So I think that's where it's an interesting balance to work out. And then if you look at developers as a whole, obviously, devs and software is eating the world, the proliferation of software as a service. There's a lot of developers that I see and I follow on Twitter as an example and other socials. They all have side gigs. They're all doing these side gigs, which, apart from their day job, which obviously they're looking for that one thing that's going to make them, rich and retire, basically. So I think because of that, not that I'm saying there's a lack of focus there, but I think that also takes away from the skills that are needed to be developed within organizations, enterprises.
And, that's a very good point, Anthony, because in some markets in the APJ, and you've seen this as well, I have, as I talk to people like you, leaders like you every day, many senior managers, CEOs have recalled their staff back to the office for precisely this reason, the lack of focus. And that's a very pertinent point that you've brought up.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of half these days, because obviously we want to live in a world where we can think about. I mean, I'm a great example of that, right? I live in Perth, and I've managed to be able to have a really good role within Veeam, and so I'm kind of a product of this remote work. But I do know myself that in ways I would be a little bit more. I'm not even going to say useful, because then who knows who's listening to this show. But I think if I was in the Singapore office, as an example, I would be able to do different things and actually approach some of my responsibilities differently. So it is a vital and viable call that CTOs and CEOs are making to bring people back in, because I don't think we've quite reached the level of autonomy and trustworthiness overall.
Yeah. I think that's a key thing. Trustworthiness and autonomy. Not everyone can manage those two things well.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to come back now to ChatGPT and the final trend that you identified, which is around AI. Now, ChatGPT has made a major impact in democratizing the use of AI, or helping the broader public understand the impact of AI, really, I think, for the first time.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this, and how is this going to shape the landscape moving forward?
Yeah, it's definitely the hot topic, right? If you think about maybe last year, 2020, 21, 22, it was crypto and Bitcoin. And that was the Web3 movement. What I've seen is rumblings that the real Web3 movement is AI and artificial general intelligence, right? So it's something that I've been trying to just absorb through audiobooks and podcasts and just trying to understand it, because it's so critical and important to where we're going to be as a society, not just IT in general. ChatGPT definitely brought it very, very quickly to the front. And all of a sudden, the way that they released it, bringing it to the masses, the way that they were able to proliferate, reachability through social channels to get people to use it was brilliant, and absolutely caught the big boys napping. Like, you think about Google, who were the best placed to be able to take advantage of this, and they might still get there, right? Microsoft have done their thing with ChatGPT as well, but they effectively are the ones that have brought it to the masses, and it raises a number of interesting questions. I think the big one that I saw straight away is, now that we've got all of these particular endpoints, so I think it was 75 billion particular endpoints that they brought into the model to be able to do what it does. This is version 3 of their Da Vinci model. What version 4 is bringing is, I think I've got to think this. I can see the number of zeros, but I can't work it out in my head. I think it's 1,000 billion endpoints. Okay, so it's by a factor of a lot. It's a lot more powerful. So think about that. So my big thing is, can this now replace certain departments, marketing departments? Now, if I tell ChatGPT to write a blog post on the release of version 12 of our product, which is happening next week, by the way, it does a pretty good job of that. Now, you have to obviously take that and manipulate it a bit to get it to the right level. But what it spits out now in this version 3 is pretty good. Interesting that it could replace people in the future. Will it replace people? Have we basically written everything that needs to be written and created everything that we've needed to create as humans at this point, that these models can now take and manipulate through their neural language processing?
And that brings also then broader questions around the future of work. What do then human beings do after this? If you've replaced whole chunks of people in jobs that we thought that weren't replaceable, white collar jobs. Yeah.
So let's look at, I'll pick on developers again, right? There's so many developers in the world, and a lot of them are, I kind of call them copy developers, and I'm one of those guys. I'm not a coder, but I know how to code a little bit, right? Because I see examples and I take that and I manipulate it. A lot of the developers out there, unless you're elite, unless you're a really top-notch developer, is basically doing that. They're looking at examples, they're writing code based on that, they're putting their own spin on it, and then they basically release, their code, be it an application wherever they work. If ChatGPT or other AI can effectively write code at a more than acceptable level, which it already can look at samples of code, GitHub, other sites up there, and it can give you a great working example. Now, obviously, you've still got to manipulate them to make them work. If we take that to the next level and think about 3 or 4 or 5 years in the future, are those entry-level developers still going to be needed? There's a great book called Life 3.0, which I love reading, I love citing, because it had a really great prologue example of the Amiga team, which is effectively a team that created an AI that was fed relative information, a copy of the internet, which is effectively what happened with ChatGPT, fed a copy of the internet, and then it became self-aware. It started to program and improve itself. And at that point, it was able to then do crazy things. I won't spoil the story. It's a great one for the viewers. I would recommend it to anyone. But it's paralleling what we're seeing today, which is, again, exciting and scary.
Now, it's been a fascinating conversation, Anthony. We could probably go on for another hour, but, before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think just in general, I think if you think about what we've talked about, number one, from my perspective, from Veeam Software, we're trying to be there to continue to innovate in a space where it's so critical to think about your data. Data gets impacted by cyber attacks by ransomware. So you have to understand that end-to-end process. Veeam's part of that, but I would encourage everyone to think of that education piece and the recoverability business process at the end. And then if we think about, AI, see how you can leverage that moving forward for good. Okay. A great example would be for us, as I tie it back to our technology, we've got a piece of technology called the Data Integration API, which lets you mount up a backup to a live file system, which then you can do stuff to it. So just think if you're able to run an AI model over the data that you've brought up, not in real time, but it's still very, very usable. So you're activating that data, leveraging AI, and then being aware of what it is from the ransomware cyber attack recovery point of view.
Now, Anthony, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been a pleasure.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Brian.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Anthony Spiteri, the regional CTO of Asia Pacific Japan and lead cloud and service provider technologist at Veeam. Now on Biztechasia Technology Show. Now I'm Brian Fernandez, and this interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.